Welcome back, everyone, to the Divine Feminine Healers podcast. I am so honored and grateful to have on the wonderful Dr. John Douillard on the podcast today, the owner of Life Spa, best-selling author, so well known in the Ayurveda scene. And thank you for being here.
Thanks, Angela. Really good to be here.
So, a question that I ask all of my guests is, how do you connect with the Divine Feminine?
Um, yeah, it's a great question. I have a sort of a special relationship with, you know, I call it the Blessed Mother, and we have little statues of the Blessed Mother all around the house, and so I have a pretty good relationship. And when I meditate every day, twice a day, I always start my meditation with a little prayer, and I pray to my very special ancestors and some of my very special mentors, and then I always do a special prayer to the Blessed Mother. I just feel like that's that creative energy, and so I have a very strong connection there that I pray every day to.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for sharing that special moment that you have. I'm so curious, were you brought up in a certain way where that really fostered that strong connection that you have with the Blessed Mother?
I don't know, I think, yeah, I probably, I was raised as a Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I was an altar boy, all of that. But then, that I don't think I I didn't really stay with it as I grew up, because my wife and I got married on the beach in Hawaii, and we started having a bunch of kids. We went back to the Catholic Church, and I thought it'd be good to have like a religion for them, and they didn't like the idea that I got married on the beach in Hawaii, and it was like, so all these rules started coming up. Like, okay, I'm out. Um, but I always had that relationship with the Blessed Mother. That's just kind of, and I think the more, well, I don't even know if it was from my Catholic upbringing. I think it was more from learning Ayurveda and having a much more intimate and understanding with the divine feminine, the creative force, the creative intelligence, and how in Ayurveda it's highly revered and recognized, the divine mother and the divine feminine and that creative energy. So I think it comes more from that. But I do have that Catholic upbringing, so you know so most of the statues are of the Blessed Mother, like that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Somewhat non-denominational, but yeah, they're there.
for sure. That's so interesting. I grew up Catholic as well, and I always think of that like, oh, although I wouldn't attribute to my belief systems mirroring Catholicism really now, it just was interesting to see that that's kind of like how I was opened up, I guess, to the ideas of these
Yeah.
archetypes in the first place. And then as you go on your journey and then you start to expand and learn the deeper messages behind it, and it's maybe not so secular or narrow-minded, but there's actually so much more of an expansion behind it. And it's so true. I think a lot of healers who get called to Ayurveda, it's such this motherly, nurturing, creative energy that you're speaking on.
Yeah, and I think when you how you're brought up and the belief systems you have, I mean, I think that's why in certain parts of the world people may worship Shiva or Jesus or Muhammad. It's because the same energy, but we have our own imprint on it, and it seems to work. So go with it, right?
Yeah, I love that. So something that I want to talk about today was Ayurvedic cleansing, and I know that's something. Well, you're a master of a lot of things in Ayurveda, but I know that's something that you have especially an affinity towards. So I just kind of want to break down cleansing because I know this term can often be misconstrued in our Western culture as we use cleanses in the Western way in a very different way than Ayurveda does. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what is the purpose of cleansing seasonally in Ayurveda.
Well, I think, first of all, if you read the Vedic text, they say that the disease starts during the seasonal transition. So 7 days before the seasonal change, equinox or solstice, and 7 days after, that's the magic window to really either do it right or do it wrong and transition in an inappropriate way where disease begins to take its first foothold there. I think more than ever before, a study came out recently from the United Nations Economic Commission from Europe, and they found that 99% of the population on the planet are breathing polluted air above the legal safe limit set by the World Health Organization. They're saying that the number one health threat on the planet is air pollution.
Wow.
Here in America, we dump 70 million tons of toxic chemicals in our atmosphere every year. That filters down into, you know, onto the food that we eat, even if it's organic, the water that we drink, that water is irrigating everything. So you just simply can't get away from the fact that our foods are really contaminated, even if we do the very, very best we can. And that's where Ayurveda came in. They understood that there was pollution when civilization happened. If you go to any, even a small little city, old school, when they were burning cow dung and different things for fuel, it was polluted, and you needed to have some mechanism to detoxify that. So that would happen during the change of seasons. And then Ayurveda used very special techniques that are now well studied to pull those impurities out of the deep tissues.
Yeah, I love that. It's so interesting to hear that statistic, and I think that's why seasonal cleansing, that's why it's been such a huge part of my journey too. It's like there's no getting around it. It's literally always all around us, and our bodies need that regular maintenance, not just for the physical, but for the mental and the emotional and the spiritual release that happens. And so I'm curious to hear more on what is the science behind an Ayurvedic cleanse.
Well, yeah, I think, and we should definitely save room for the emotional side of this as well, because that's a really big piece of why Ayurveda is what it is. Ayur means life, Veda means truth. The whole point of Ayurveda is to align yourself with the truth of your life, which is something very deep on the inside. But to stick with the physical for a second, because you really can't do spiritual if your body's like, screaming in pain or discomfort and those kinds of things. So we have to get the body balanced so we can have that ability to be more settled and content in our system, and then refine our perception. So Ayurveda was that system to help the body become more pure, more calm, more still, out of pain. And then we can do what we're designed to do, which is refine this human instrument to perceive subtle energy in a way that you can, over time, thin the veil between the physical and the spiritual. That's what the whole thing's about. You know, the more common definition of Ayurveda is the science of life. Veda mean life, or Ayur mean life, Veda mean truth, or science. And that's true. That means living your life in harmony with the natural cycles of nature and being a part of these rhythms and cleansing on a seasonal basis. And, the diet dramatically changes from one season to the next. We know that the soil bugs in the soil change from winter to summer to spring. We know that those bugs are specifically attached to certain roots and foods that grow in that soil. And then when you eat those foods in that season, you're inoculating your gut with the right bugs for the right season to sort of decongest you in the spring and boost immunity in the winter and help you dissipate heat in the summer. And in fact, it's so important that the foods we eat have the bugs on them that studies show now that the bugs are just as important for the medicinal benefit of the plant or the herb, for example. So when you eat your food that's been sprayed with chemicals and pesticides that kill the bugs on them, and those bugs, those microbes, actually help us make the enzymes to digest the hard to digest foods like wheat and dairy and nuts and seeds and all that. So when you eat those foods devoid of the bugs, we only are getting half of the nutritional profile of the food we eat. If you look at herbs, for example, a lot of the herbs now, the big thing is extracts because they're more potent, and America is more is better always. And the problem with that is that when you make an herbal extract, it's sterile, which means that there's no microbes that were naturally occurring with the plant. And when the plant isn't really the whole plant unless it has its bugs with it, that's part of us. We would be not a human if we didn't have the bugs with us. So to provide food with no bugs because of pesticides, or provide herbs that are sterile like extracts, they become more medicines that, kind of do the job for the body, but they don't help the body restore its function on its own. That's why at lifespa.com, our store, we have nothing but, I do have some extracts as medicines, but the vast majority of my herbs are whole organic herbs. We test the bugs when we get the herb, then we make our formula and we test the bugs again at the end, because that's what we're required to do. So I know that when we put certain formulas together, we enhance the microbial probiotic profile of our herbs because they're alive and well. And we also make sure there's no bad bugs in them as well, which is just a really neat understanding that's not well known. People think, oh, an extract, an herb doesn't matter, it's just more potent. Well, no, it's completely sterile versus something that's alive and well. And that's the beauty of nature. So that's one thing, is foods and stuff that we eat need to be, that'll protect us from the bad things, the environmental pollutants. But studies also show that there's a process in Ayurvedic cleansing called lipophilic mediated detoxification, which is like ridiculously long word for something. Lipophilic means that fats like fats. So when you take fat in your diet, good healthy fat, and particularly ghee, that ghee will go into your body and it'll actually absorb into your tissues, and it'll attach to other fat soluble chemicals, the environmental pollutants and all the bad stuff, heavy metals. They're all fat soluble, which is why they're so hard to get rid of. If they're water soluble, you just urinate them out, no problem. But when they're fat soluble, it's a little bit more of a process. So the ghee goes into your body, it's lipophilic, grabs onto those toxic fat cells in your deep tissues and pulls them out of your body to the tune of over 50% detoxification of pesticides and environmental pollutants in one study, heavy metals in another study. So there's really good science behind this whole process that was developed thousands of years ago before they created the name lipophilic mediated detox. They were doing ghee cleanses to help detoxify the deep tissues, which is really, really important.
Wow. I love your background in science and how specific you can get it, because I think that's really important for a lot of our listeners who are moving into a holistic space. So thank you for that breakdown of it. And it's so interesting when we break down the principles of science versus holistic medicine. And I think that's at the heart of it. That principle that you just described is being able to break down something and isolate it. It's the same how you go to an internist for your digestive disorders, and then you go to an OBGYN for your female reproductive issues. It's this segmenting of the body when it's really just this holistic entity. And how can we consistently look at the body at that? That's truly one of the biggest principles in Ayurveda. So it was really cool to see that segmented with the bugs and creating that healthy microbiome with your digestion.
Yeah, and the other piece of that puzzle is the intestinal skin, right? The lining of your intestinal tract can't be too dry, a little bit constipated, can't be too wet, a little loose or mucousy, has to be just right, like the three little bears, right? So it has to be perfect for you to establish the right environment for the right bugs, to manufacture the right neurotransmitters, to support the gut-brain-brain-gut connection, to keep you healthy and strong. There's a gut respiratory tract gut relationship. So your gut immunity, which is 70% of your immune response, is directly related to your respiratory immunity. And so if your gut health is problematic, you can't eat X, Y, or Z, and you have to bubble wrap your diet, not eat certain foods to feel good, that's fine. Don't eat those foods if you don't feel good with eating them, but don't stop there. Let's fix the underlying reason why you can't eat those foods, because that digestive strength is directly linked to your ability to detoxify all the crazy chemicals we just talked about that we're being exposed to all the time. And the rubber meets the road in the intestinal skin. And if that mucosa isn't happy, and that becomes a problem. Now, Ayurveda has so many ways to do it. Ghee, for example, which is used for the lipophilic mediated detox part, it also is the highest food source of something called butyric acid. And butyric acid is a fatty acid that is made inside your gut by specific microbes, one called like Clostridium butyricum, which is a bug that literally his job in life is to make butyric acid, which is the highest food source of butyric acid on the planet is ghee. And that butyric acid has been shown to boost gut immunity. It feeds the colon cells. It supports the health and integrity of your entire intestinal skin and creates that environment for the good bugs to proliferate, which is really important. When you get cultured ghee, which is sort of hard to find, and that's what we have at Lifespa's grass-fed cultured ghee, you get not only the culturing process amps up the content of the butyric acid in the ghee, it also amps up the concept, converts the linoleic acid into what's called conjugated linoleic acid, which is like the superfood for losing weight and all that belly fat and hip fat and immunity that we're looking for. So it's really, really powerful. And that's what the original Vedic text talked about, is making culture ghee. And they said there's 1,000 different remedies in the Vedic text for culture ghee. And I think that's something to do. So the ghee does that part of the healing of the intestinal skin. And the other part of the Ayurvedic cleanse is something called kitchari. And kitchari is when you take, it's a superfood for healing the intestinal tract. It's a superfood for people who are, elderly, in convalescence, and really need easy food to digest, or young kids who are baby food. It's the first food for babies in India traditionally. But now in our culture, we have people who can't even eat rice or beans or grains or nuts or seeds. And it is true that whenever nature makes a grain with a protein inside the grain or the seed, the nature puts a little protective shell around it so it doesn't get eaten up by every other little critter in the soil or on the plant. And those anti-nutrients are a little harder to digest. So when your digestion becomes weaker because of our Western ways, those foods become hard to digest. And then you have people telling you, don't eat those foods because they have lectins on them or anti-nutrients on them or things like that. That's crazy, because those anti-nutrients, the lectins, phytic acids, goitrogens, oxalates, those hard to digest foods, nightshades, those foods have a little bit of irritation. And that little bit of irritation is what stimulates the gut to create an immune response. And that's called gut immunity, which is 70% of your immune response, which is bidirectionally related to your respiratory immunity. And you wonder why, right? We had this pandemic issue. A big part of that is because people can't digest anything anymore. And as a result, we've bubble wrapped our diet. And I get it. You don't want to eat stuff that makes you feel bad, but taking the food out of the diet is only a symptom reliever. It's not an actual solution to the problem, and it compromises your gut immunity. It's called hormesis, where a little bit of these harder to digest things, they make us stronger. There was a study done, I think an amazing study done by the Amish people, Amish kids, right, who have the lowest rates of asthma on the planet, come from a special valley in Switzerland. And the genetic cousins of them come from the same valley. They also came to America, and they're called the Hutterites. But they didn't do the Amish farming way of doing it, where it was very traditional, no electricity. They went sterile and American farming. And the Hutterites, same genetic codes, people, have the highest rates of asthma as kids in America, right? So the same genetic people have one group the highest and one group the lowest rates of asthma for their kids in America. Like, it was a perfect study, right? And they found that what happened was they measured the dust in the barns where the Amish kids were running around with, their pets were their cows, and they're barefoot in the barn. And they found that it was the dust in the barn that irritated the respiratory tract in a hormetic way, which doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. And all of a sudden, they had resistance to getting asthma, and they have the lowest rates of asthma on the planet, right? So we can't bubble wrap life. We have to strengthen it. Even the environmental pollutants, to a certain extent, has a hormetic effect. That's been well studied, but it's the overwhelm on top of a weak digestion / detox system, which is why we, in Ayurveda, the process is not just shovel it out and cleanse it out like most Western cleanses. The idea was to, yes, cleanse it out, use lipophilic mediated detox to pull the impurities out of your deep tissues, but also while you're doing that, fix your digestive strength, detox your lymphatic, your liver, restore function of the upper digestive process, and heal the skin of your intestinal tract. And that was a long way of getting to the kitchari, where the old days, someone would take the beans, the mung beans, and split it by hand. I can't even imagine doing that. And then making the split yellow mung beans without the husk, and then taking the rice and dehusking that, and taking the husk off, and taking the dehusked rice and the split meat beans, putting them together, adding spices and so on, and cooking it for 3 hours. And they had to do that all by hand to make a medicine for the baby, or for her first food for the baby, and a medicine for the elderly folks, right? So it's just amazing how important that was, and how healing that is for the intestinal tract. And that's just something and nowadays, when I first got into practice in 1984, nobody couldn't eat rice. Nobody couldn't eat beans. Rice and beans was feeding the planet. Take rice and beans away from the people on this planet, and more than half the folks are going to be starving. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's now I have so many patients who can't eat rice or beans, and kitchari, they can't eat it. And that was the baby food. That was the medicine that was made. So we've gotten ourselves into a corner, and that corner is resolved by doing certain cleanses that will not only detoxify, but rebuild, digestive strength, which is such a critical piece of the puzzle. And that starts with healing and repairing the intestinal skin. And that's what kitchari was designed to do. Restore that gut immunity and that gut resiliency, and that intestinal tract as a protective barrier for bad bugs infiltrating through the intestinal lining.
Yeah, that's something what I love about Ayurvedic cleanses is, well, if we go back again, one of the principles of Ayurveda is empowering you that you can heal. And so the cleanse is really about that. It's strengthening the digestive fire so that you can be able to digest all these different things that we're coming across on a regular basis. It's not saying that it's a one and done thing, but when we do it regularly in cleansing out, then we're able to also strengthen that digestive fire, which helps with the gut microbiome and immunity and everything that you were saying. And I love cultured ghee too. It's actually something that I just recently discovered, and wow, like what a difference that I'm noticing in my body, and just even the taste I think is a lot better than even just regular ghee. But it's really, I think the combination between ghee and kitchari is such this magic combination. It's almost wild that they were able to kind of channel this knowledge thousands of years ago, and seeing how it's healed so many clients. I'm sure you experienced thousands at this point of all the transitions that they've had in their bodies. So we've talked about like digestive healing, the intestinal lining, having a strong digestive system, which, as we know in Ayurveda, when you have a strong digestion, that also helps to heal every other system of the body. I'm curious to hear if there's any unique client experiences or any recent ones that have been top of mind for you, where you've really seen the results of them cleansing and how that's really impacted their body.
Boy, we get so many people who cleanse with us, and we've been doing it for so many years. There's just so many stories. I remember one time I got a phone call from the Women's World magazine, and they said, do you have a cleanse that we could test out and see? And I said, sure, you can take our short home cleanse, which is a 4-day Ayurvedic kitchari ghee cleanse. It's an ebook. It's free. Anybody can download it. I should just go to my website and download the ebook, and then you can use that. And then they hung up, and I didn't hear from them for like 9 months or something. And I just forgot about it and thought whatever happened, maybe they just didn't do it or whatever. And I get a call like 9 months or almost a year later, and they say, we'd like to do a fact check on your cleanse. I'm going like, what cleanse? And they said, well, we did a focus group with 40 people using your short home cleanse ebook, and the results were amazing. People on average lost 11 pounds in those 4 days, and they were feeling so fantastic and had all these benefits. We want to do a feature story on it. So it ended up being the cover story of Women's World magazine, which was kind of really cool. And I love how the Madison Avenue took our cleanse and made the ghee sound like they were drinking a milkshake, and made the kitchari they were eating some gourmet recipe from, it was really amazing. I was like, wow, they really made this sound delicious. And it can be, but once you actually do a ghee kitchari cleanse, it's pretty austere, but they made it sound like it was the most amazing thing on the planet. But it works really, really well. And that was it. I have so many patients who come into me and they can't eat the grains or the nuts or seeds, and they've been gluten-free, and they really like to have a little bit of bread, but they're scared to death or they can't do it. And then all of a sudden we reboot their digestive strength, we heal their intestinal skin, we detoxify their lymphatic system, and all of a sudden they can do gluten again. Studies show that gluten is an anti-nutrient. Or a hard to digest protein, I should say, rather. And it is, again, harder to digest. So it's not surprising that it's sort of like, public enemy number one, dairy, public enemy number two, because they're also hard to digest proteins in there, which will require strong digestion. And one study showed that people And I wrote an article about this at lifespot.com, where I think it was called the Dangers of a Gluten-Free Diet. And the study showed, and this is where you start to see the real science come in. Studies show that people who are gluten-free compared to people who are eating gluten, people who are eating gluten had 4 times less mercury in their blood than people who are gluten-free.
Oh,
They had significantly more killer T cells in their gut than people who were gluten-free. They had more good bugs, less bad bugs than people who were gluten-free. And they also were significantly, these were Harvard studies with over 100,000 people, less risk of diabetes and less risk of heart disease for the folks who were eating wheat compared to people who were gluten-free. So the studies are already coming in that when you start to bubble wrap your diet, you end up in a situation where you become weaker, not stronger, even though your digestive and food intolerance may not be there anymore. But sooner or later, you just keep going down this road of having to take more and more food out of your diet. And then you end up with nutritional deficiency issues, which is the classic long-term side effect of being gluten-free. Or, which is really worse and sad, is the people who are celiac, who really do need to be gluten-free, they end up with nutritional deficiencies because it's not just the gluten that they're not able to digest. It's a sort of a global hypersensitivity to many foods, and that's the real problem. We don't want to go down that road. We want to go down the road of being open to more diverse foods in our diet, because that means more diverse bugs. There was a study done, they took the bugs from this ancient 1,000-year-old poop from a museum in New Mexico, and they figured out a way to get the microbes out of that poop. And they compared it to modern people's poop and the bugs in there, and they found that there were so many more species of bugs that existed in the gut of the people 1,000 years ago than there are today, that they literally called it an extinction event. The lack of microbial diversity, that eating more diverse foods, was so dramatically different from then to now that they actually called it an extinction event, right? So that's like, again, we end up, you can't eat this, can't eat this. We see ourselves, I can't eat wheat, can't eat dairy, can't eat nuts, can't eat seeds, can't eat tomatoes, can't eat, zucchini, can't eat nightshades. You know what? That's not how we got here as human beings. We, as hunter-gatherers, we ate everything, and we had to figure out a way to digest it. And, a lot of that was uncooked, hard to digest stuff. And we became strong immune beings because we were able to pull that off. And now we're sort of bubble wrapping everything, making everything super easy. And we're going down the wrong road in terms of our immunity. You know what I mean? Now we have, just as we speak today, there's like viruses, there's flus and RSV and COVID. And I'm like, gosh, it's just like, and we're depending on, vaccines, and not that they're bad, but we also have an immune system if we're strong, but we've been fed so much processed food, foods devoid of the bugs that support our immune response, our intestinal skin, a healthy microbiome. And we are becoming weaker as a result of all that. And the solution doesn't have to be a vaccine if we would all do what nature provided us, which is not in the grocery store, unfortunately, anymore.
yeah, it's so interesting to think. I've totally subscribed to gluten-free too, just because I just want to avoid the inflammation and want to avoid the side effects that come with it. And this is giving me really good inquiry, because I think about, oh my gosh, how many restaurants are curtailing now, and even you see in grocery stores of like things just being labeled gluten-free, and it's nurturing this type of person who's going to avoid all these things and just get weaker and weaker immune systems. It makes me think, oh, is this the direction that we're going into? But it's confusing because, there are so many Ayurvedic healers that are rising up, and the holistic medicine is getting its name out there even more, and finding the root cause of the imbalance and all these things that are helpful for it. So where do you kind of see the polarities of both of these kind of working together in the future?
You mean like Ayurveda and Western medicine, or Ayurveda herbal medicine? Which two?
Yeah, Ayurveda and Western medicine, like the Western side of it, of let's keep removing things from the diet and let's kind of extract things and separate them. But at the other side, Ayurveda is like, no, let's bring it into wholeness. Let's find the root cause of the disease.
Well, I think, to be honest, I think that, the taking food out of the diet wasn't Western medicine by any means. They were all like, eat it all, it's good, the grocery store is good, take a drug to fix it if you have a problem. That's what Western medicine was. When I got into practice in 1984, you know, we were treating candida and chronic fatigue syndrome and Epstein-Barr. Those things are now out of favor. They're sort of phased out, sort of. We would take people off of the wheat way back then, take people off of the dairy way back then. That was natural medicine. And and we would give them probiotics way back then and digestive enzymes way back then. And people got better. But what I found was in my practice was they would get better for a little while, but then the problem would come back, or they'd become sensitive to a different food. And I really realized in short order that taking the wheat out of the diet and taking the dairy out of the diet didn't really fix any problem. It just give them a little bit of a reprieve from their symptoms. And then the next food they were intolerant to. Giving them digestive enzymes didn't do anything except help them digest the food for them. It wasn't actually helping them be better digesters. Giving them probiotics was just giving them bugs that they didn't have because their intestinal lining was out of balance, right? So then I started realizing this is sort of crazy. So, I started realizing that you got to fix the digestive system. And then when I went in 1986, went to India and studied Ayurveda, I realized like the whole thing is about fixing the digestive strength and the lymphatic system and liver health and your agni and your digestion. And then you realize that giving digestive enzymes is just like crutch, and taking wheat and dairy out of the diet is just a crutch. But somewhere along the way, Western medicine figured out that this thing, of it taking wheat and dairy out of the diet helped a lot of people, which it did temporarily. And then that became like the new thing. I did a podcast with David Perlmutter, the author of Grain Brain, who actually took one of my very early Ayurvedic classes many years ago. So I knew David. And we had a debate about, gluten-free versus not. And I cited all the science on my side of the aisle, and he did his. And my mother watched the debate, and she said, I clearly won both debates. We had two of them. And at the end of the second debate, he actually finally agreed that eating good, healthy wheat grains from the ground, isn't going to give you Alzheimer's disease because there's zero studies to prove that. And it's because the wheat is not being broken down properly. And the studies show if you don't have the digestive strength to break down the gluten in your stomach, or the dairy casein protein in your stomach, or the fat in your liver, those proteins and fats will go undigested into your intestinal tract. They will be incompletely digested and therefore too big to get into your blood and nourish you, thus the nutritional deficiencies. They'll get uptaken into the garbage can around your intestinal tract, which is your lymphatic system. The lion's share of your lymph is around your belly, and that uptakes all the garbage and the trash. And when it gets congested, that lymph can get congested and it can make you have a big belly. It can give you a food coma after a meal. It goes into the brain lymphatic system and gives you brain fog. It can go into the skin-associated lymph and create rashes and hives and things like that. All the things in his book that were related to why you should be grain-free, the grain brain and all that, were directly linked to lymphatic congestive symptoms due to upstream digestive issues. And if you would just fix the digestive system, people can start eating gluten again, which is what I see in my practice from doing, our cleanses. Our Colorado Ayurveda cleanse is a 14-day cleanse, and that's a massive digestive reset, intestinal skin repair, lymphatic cleanse, liver detox and repair, and getting all aspects of digestion and detox back online for you. And then you begin to see, whoa, now I'm starting to widen the berth of foods that I can tolerate versus now, oh, no, 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 oh, no, 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 no. That's just a dangerous road to hoe. And that's what I fight so passionately about and work with my patients on all the time for years and years and years. And it's rewarding because the results are amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And the study support, it's really making me rethink the way that I choose to find gluten and how I avoid it. So would you recommend that you just be sure that you're mindful of the sources of grains and dairy that you implement into your diet? And then I guess wondering how often you're really consuming these things. Would you recommend this as becoming part of a daily thing? Is this an occasional type of thing?
That's a really great question. I think in terms of how often we should eat it, foods in nature, I wrote a book called The 3-Season Diet many, many years ago about eating according to nature. And then the science came out. I wish I had that science when I wrote the book. The science shows that the bugs in the soil change from season to season. The science shows that the Hadza, the hunter-gatherer tribes, the bugs in their gut changes from season to season to season, suggesting that our bugs should change from season to season to season, but they don't. and wheat and grains and nuts and seeds, all the vegetable proteins that have the hard to digest anti-nutrients on them, they come in the fall for the winter eating. So those heavy, dense proteins and fats, which are loaded with anti-nutrients, they come at that time. Ayurveda said that the digestion gets stronger at that time to do those harder to digest foods, those more dense end of summer, fall harvested foods, right? And we now know that there's an enzyme called amylase, which we expressed about 2 million years ago. We didn't have it earlier, but we got it because we started eating more starches and grains from the savannas in Africa. That's basically where, with nothing but grasses and grass seeds and barley, that we ate. Gluten millions and millions of years ago. They found gluten in the teeth of ancient humans 3.5 million years ago at the University of Utah, right? So we ate it. It's a thing for a long time. And now all of a sudden we shouldn't. So the point was is that so that the gluten was that amylase to this day actually increases in your body and my body in the fall when the grains are harvested, when the amylase and the starches are harvested. Amylase is an enzyme, a digestive enzyme for starch and for sugar. So we get that more in the fall when those foods are harvested. We get them less in the spring. Studies show that our bug guts in the spring are different than the bug guts or the gut bugs in the fall. In the spring, we have these actinobacteria, which are specific for fat and fiber. We have bacteroidetes in the fall for starch and carbohydrates and things like that. And when you look at nature, it's trying to get a burger and or a French fries or something in the spring, good luck. Not there. You have to wait till that grows into a grain or a potato at the end of the summer, and that's when the starches are harvested. And that extra starch was there to give us huge amounts of extra fuel to store as reserve fuel for the long winter time when there's nothing being harvested, and to give us that extra little liner of fat for insulation. These are natural circadian rhythms, and we shouldn't ignore them. So the idea is that we would eat more, right, grains and things in the fall, gain a few pounds. I always gain 5 to 10 pounds in the winter. And then I will lose all that in the spring with, in the spring, we have a much more austere diet. It's a low carb diet. It's a naturally occurring sort of ketogenic diet because you're burning your own fat as fuel at that time. You would do more fasting and much more austere eating at that time. So that's the idea that you don't have to eat it every single day. And definitely the kind of bread that you would eat either should be a really good 72-hour fermented sourdough with nothing but wheat, salt, and water. It's all you need to make bread. Organic, obviously. Artisan bread is really important, but buying the bread from a grocery store, never do I do that. I buy bread that's only got wheat, salt, and water in it. And sometimes it'll be different types of grains like spelt and wheat germ or different things like that provide or rye, different grains that are really good. But the same thing, made with a starter, with fermented, and with wheat, salt, and water without the oil. Because the oil they put in the bread and the crackers and all the stuff in the middle of your grocery store is made with the oil that they created in the 1960s. And they said, oh, this is polyunsaturated fatty acids that will cure heart disease. It'll lower your cholesterol. This was like the cure. And then it didn't end up being the cure. And we have heart disease worse than ever. But they found that those highly processed oils, bleached, boiled, and deodorized, and cooked at over 450 degrees, were really good at preserving food. So they could put it in a cracker, it never goes bad. They could put it in a loaf of bread, it never gets hard anymore, ever. And that's why it doesn't go bad, is because the microbes in the bread on the counter won't eat that oil. So when you eat it, the bugs inside your gut who eat oil, they won't eat that oil. So where does all the oil from all those preservative fats go, the highly processed fats go? Right to your liver. And your liver goes, what do I do with all this? So it literally creates bile sludge and congested liver and gallbladder issues, which is the #1 abdominal elective surgery in America today, is take your gallbladder out. And that's not normal. And that's because of the really highly processed oils. So the only oil that's been proven to lower heart disease and all that, lower your cholesterol, LDL levels, and really force your liver to really decongest is olive oil. There are other ones that are good, but they don't have the science that olive oil does. I can literally cite, I did a podcast with an olive oil researcher from Brown University, Mary Flynn, and she said to me that she did studies showing that 2 tablespoons of olive oil per day will lower your cholesterol, increase your HDL or LDL, all that stuff that we really desperately need. But that you got to also at the same time get rid of the bad fats, take the good fats. And so there's so many things we can do naturally to bring it back, but no one tells us that.
Totally. Eliminating those industrial seed oils is so huge. I think of like the whole canola oil epidemic, basically, that it's happening and so many restaurants cook with it. That's why it's so, to me, like a Divya's kitchen is such a gold standard, way beyond, because she just uses ghee and coconut oil and olive oils, and that's so unheard of. But I truly have noticed there's so much inflammation that happens when you're using those poor oils. And that's really good information for our community for how you can really find those grains and the type of dairy. Because again, coming back to the Ayurvedic principle, that it's really important to know the source of where it came from, so you feel more connected to it, which is the gist of what if we're kind of like encapsulate this whole conversation, is what you're saying is it's coming back to nature, it's coming back to aligning whatever nature is telling us, and then how can we mirror and work with nature rather than against it, trying to extract it and trying to separate all of these things, but live in a more holistic way.
Yeah, I think whenever you take nature apart, it's not nature anymore. If you take turmeric, which has 300 constituents, and you take curcumin out of it, that's a drug. It's not natural. And studies are now showing that when you take just curcumin, it acts like a drug. It can help reverse your breast cancer or your colon cancer, but it also can compromise your body's ability to make stem cells, and it can be toxic at certain levels as well. So whenever you take nature apart, you create a drug which has consequences. And we all know that because you watch TV and you see the beautiful beach scene, and then they tell you all about the drug, and then they list you all the side effects while you're watching the beautiful beach, and you might not notice that they're saying you can almost die from this thing, but the consequence is oftentimes, less important than what that drug will actually do for you. And that's medicine, and that's fine. It's good. It can save lives for sure. But when you do it in an herb, same thing happens. So when you take the whole plant with all 300 constituents, you find that it can boost stem cells. It can have better absorption and assimilation, and it doesn't create a dependency. It doesn't overrule your body's intelligence. It works with your body's intelligence because your body recognizes this is a plant. It's on the planet. It has the bugs in it. It has all the constituents together. I don't have to figure out what is this chemical all of a sudden out of the blue I don't know anything about. And then that can overrule your intelligence. So science can do amazing things, but it also can do things that are all about the quick fix. And we're all about that in America, but not realizing the long-term effect of breaking nature apart. It's important to know what you're doing and look at the long-term effects before we just throw it on the market. And that's the problem, is innovation ends up being way ahead of science. And you go, oh, they didn't know that curcumin actually has these negative side effects. It can be very medicinal. And I've written articles about the good, the bad, the ugly on that in that regard as well.
You so beautifully articulated everything that happens with the physical body in the cleanse. And I kind of want to shortly just go into what happens in the emotional body when you're going through a cleanse. How does that begin to release and dissipate when you are using all these externalities of ghee and the kitchari, and the body is pushing out these excess fats and toxins and accumulating better bugs in the digestive tract? From what you've witnessed and maybe your own experience, what happens emotionally?
Well, I think it's the most important part, actually, because it's really, at the end of the day, it's this crazy mind of ours that makes us unhealthy and makes us feel bad, and the worry and the stress, and is so impactful on every level of our physiology. And Ayurveda called it mental ama, or toxins from the mind, or emotional toxins. Candace Bird, who did research at NIH, she wrote a book called The Molecules of Emotion, and found there are literally molecules that carry these emotions, and they're stored in your fat and your muscle. So when you do a a cleanse, an Ayurvedic cleanse, and you're in a lipophilic mediated detox where the ghee is going in there and attaching to fats and pulling them out of your body, they're not only getting the environmental pollutants and the mercury out of there, they're actually pulling molecules of emotion out of those fats and bringing them during a cleanse, particularly if you have the luxury of doing it in a retreated state where you can relax. And in our cleanse, we always have options to do the retreat track or the work track. You can do it as a work kind of cleanse and just eat really clean and go to work every day. I've done that many, many times just for the more of the physical detox. But when you have the luxury of doing it as a retreat and you do the yoga and the breathing and the meditation and you really settle down, and then those emotional molecules get pulled out of the fat, they sort of come up onto your radar. And then you have a level of self, awareness and the ability to employ self-inquiry. And I have a whole self-inquiry guide that we give people during those cleanses where they can kind of go through these exercises to become more self-aware of, oh, this pattern of behavior I created as a young kid, I'm still projecting that on the screen as an adult today. It isn't serving me at all, and I'm a pleaser and I try to please everybody because I did that as a kid. And now I'm just exhausted from that or whatever the situation might be. And then that starts to you become more aware of those patterns. And when you're engaging in those patterns, and then you become aware of, we guide you through this, how to take action steps to free yourself from those old patterns. And the most important part of Ayurveda is to free the mind from those old unconscious behaviors. 95% of the things that we think and say and do as adults, science shows us, comes from impressions from the first 6 years of life. So we keep doing the same dumb thing again and again and again. And Ayurveda is about raising our vibration using breathing and pranayama and exercises and diet and healing, like we all talked about today, to kind of raise the self-awareness so you're above the emotional fray. And you can see clearly when I'm locked into that emotional reactive response and when I'm actually doing me, letting who I truly am out, the loving, kind, maybe a little more vulnerable, a little more sensitive version of me out. And that's a little tricky in a very insensitive world, but the power of us, the most, they just discovered, right, how to do nuclear fusion, right, where they put the nucleuses together and they're talking about inside these incredibly tiny protons and neutrons is so much light that the power of the sun, magic, hard to even imagine, is locked inside of that. That's what a nuclear bomb is, right? And they're talking about making it in a way that it can be harnessed in a beautiful way. But that's the power of the subtle. And that's something that Ayurveda totally talked about thousands of years ago, and how to do it naturally with yoga, breathing, refining your perception, understanding that there are photons being released out of your DNA every second, and they can either be coherent or incoherent. And when you're stressed out, eating bad food, you create so much DNA damage and so much incoherent release of light out of your body that is damaging not only to you, but the people around you. That's hard science now. But when you actually meditate and yoga and breathe, the damage goes down, and then you're left with the more coherent biophoton or photon releases, which are affected by your intention, and they carry information throughout your body, even your thoughts. But where most of us are overwhelmed with the noise of the incoherent biophotons, and that just keeps us locked into that stress. But when you actually calm it all down, you find that your intention is extremely powerful for both healing and rejuvenation at a really, really, really deep level. And that's the power of light inside our body. We have science to say, yeah, the light healing is a real thing. It's got power. It's not just out there in the metaphysical realm where people scoff at it. It's not. It's a real thing now, and now we have to look at it.
I definitely agree. I feel witnessing that emotional processing is the most transformation you can see, as you were mentioning, because it changes your patterns and your behaviors. And if you're truly wanting to create long-lasting habits even after cleanse, because as we know, this cleanse isn't just what happens within that incubator time, 4 days, 2 weeks. It's what you make and sustain the changes after that. And you truly have to change your emotions around that. And it's such a spiritual experience, I think, having kitchari every day, just because, for example, you're not focused on a sensation of different tastes and having to digest that, but you're really focusing in on, okay, what really does fulfill me? What really does nourish me? Because I'm not seeking that anymore from food, because it's the same simple kind of plain food that I'm eating. And those components, I feel that extra sense of self inquiry is what has that transformation that happens within. And that's how it starts to work with all three bodies. So thank you for that explanation of how the molecules and the emotions, that's so cool. I never knew that, the science behind that, of how that actually pushes out, but that's so fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And that's the beauty of Ayurveda. It's why, that definition, Ayu is life, Veda is truth. It's about the truth of your life. And we armor up through an entire lifetime, mentally and emotionally, and that has a powerful impact on our physiology. And so you have to pull all those strings. You pull the physiology string, detox the toxins, reboot digestion, heal the intestinal skin. And then you also have to, become a little bit more self-aware of what this crazy mind of ours is doing. And then we have the ability to change that, take the benefits off the mat, take the benefit from the cleanse with you. That's the whole point, not just to, I did cleanses when I was 18 years old, maybe even earlier. We did fasting and all this kind of aggressive kind of stuff. And I always found that the more cleanses I did, the more cleanses I needed, and because they get you clean you out, but they scrub you and they rip you to shreds, particularly your intestinal tract to shreds when you do all these intestinal cleanses. Then you need another one, and you need another one. And then when I went to India and I studied Ayurveda, it was like, oh, they're like totally careful about how delicate the intestinal lining is, and how get gloves you really need to do detox the proper way without just clobbering the body with aggressive herbs and agents to just scrub. And then I started realizing that how delicate and subtle the body really is, and then the more you study Ayurveda, you realize that the more subtle things are, the more powerful they are. And those emotions are pretty darn subtle, because we're not even looking at them half the time, but they're in there doing their thing. Pre-recorded stress response, locked in your fat, ready to respond when you go home for the holidays and you talk to your relatives. You start acting like a 4-year-old again. You're like, oh my God, those are the molecules of motion that were pre-recorded because you thought that you needed to provide some protection against this or that family member situation, whatever,
For sure. Just to finish out this conversation, I'm so fascinated by just how you connect with Ayurveda, because you've been studying and practicing for so long. I would love to hear, what are some of your current Ayurvedic practices that you have and are inspiring you?
Oh boy. Well, so many, but I'm a big believer of circadian rhythms. I've written many articles and an ebook on it, and I really do try to follow the rhythms of nature and the sun. I track the sun. I try to be with the sun as much as I possibly can, particularly in the morning and the afternoon, sunrise and sunset. The power of pranayama and breathing is critical. So I do lots and lots of breathing practices. I've written many articles about many different breathing techniques and the science and the wisdom behind them. So I do a lot of yoga, breathing, and meditation practices with a big emphasis on the breathing part. And so I think those are the two main things: is following a rhythm of life that's in sync and harmony with nature's rhythms, getting your biological clocks in sync with nature's circadian rhythms. To me, that's a really big deal. That is, in fact, Nobel Prize winning science, so it makes sense. And then doing the yoga and the breathing and the meditation, learning how to charge your body with prana and then take that prana into deep, deep silence. And that's what enhances self-awareness. And then you become more aware of those patterns of behavior that aren't serving you, and then you have the opportunity to take action to free yourself from them. That's the beautiful thing. It's the game of life. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says yogastha kuru kamani, which means establish being, then perform action, which means become perfectly still in your mind and then take action based on that. And when you're perfectly still in your mind, the lake becomes crystal clear. You can see the bottom. You can see the old yucky stuff down there, and you can purify it and take action to clean it out. You can't do that when your mind is going 90 miles an hour and you're stressed out. So we have to still the nervous system to become more self-aware. And then with that awareness, we can only then take the action to free ourselves from patterns of behavior that are directly linked to our physiological imbalances. So it all kind of ties together.
I love those practices. I agree. I love breath work and I love practicing Kundalini for that reason. And I don't know why it always fascinates me and amazes me each time after how I feel the breathwork practice and why I want to do it regularly. But it is so fascinating how it's the quickest tool that we have to change our energetic state and it's accessible to us at all times.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time and sharing all this wisdom. You are truly a wealth of knowledge. I'm just floored at how you remember so many studies. And just as a sidebar, has that always been you, just remembering these statistics and these specific studies?
No, truth be told, I feel like, um, I have such a bad memory. So that might sound crazy to hear that, but I can barely remember what I did yesterday or the day before. But for some reason, I don't know, when I start talking about this, all the studies just pop in because I write about them and I speak about them and, and I love the science part of it and the wisdom part of it together. So somehow, I don't know why, you asked me what I ate for lunch 2 days ago. I'm going, oh, I couldn't tell you that. But you asked me about these studies that I can do. I don't know why, but I would wish I could figure out, remember what I had for lunch 2 days ago. That would be helpful sometimes.
Well, your passion definitely shines through, and it's so cool to see and hear the science behind Ayurveda because I think we don't get that often. And so I know I'll direct our listeners to Live Spa where they can access a lot of the articles that you mentioned and definitely access your cleanse. And is there anything else that is going on right now at Live Spa or something that you'd like to share with our community?
Yeah, at lifespot.com, you can definitely, sign up for our newsletter. So you get all of my videos. We put out videos every week, which are really cool. We have recipes we put out and all that every week. And of course, we have our Ayurvedic store at there as well. We can get all of our organic herbs with all the bugs in them and everything. And we also have a YouTube channel you can check out. I do a Facebook Live every Wednesday at 11:15 Mountain Time, always about some new topic that I'm thinking about, or just a little blitz of science and wisdom that we talk about. And then, of course, we also have a podcast as well that you can check out. So there's lots of stuff. If you want to get more of this knowledge of ancient wisdom, modern science, lots and lots of places. Go to lifespot.com and just check out all the options.
Awesome. We'll have that linked in the show notes. And just thank you again. And just being a total role model for Ayurveda and constantly doing that self inquiry. And I love that you show up on a weekly basis and you always have a new topic that you're talking about and just feel the passion running through you. So I thank you so much for your time and being here.
Thanks, Angelica. Very nice to meet you and see you. And thanks so much.
All right. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Okay.